Hello, everybody. Hello, and welcome to Career Expert Roundtable. I am Bill, the company's expert, and with me, as always, is Abby from Life Work Balance. How you doing, Abby?
I'm doing well. Nice to see you, Bill. Happy 2025. We've got a
Yeah, Happy
kind of
New
interesting
Year.
topic. Yeah, it's the new year. I can't believe it. And, I'm still writing in my dates like 2024. And I'm like, oh gosh, I have to go
Oh
back
yeah,
and
that's gonna happen for a while. And of
yeah, a
course,
couple months probably.
here,
But today we're talking about the different types of trends with interview formats. And there's some new trends, there's some old trends. We got a lot of different formats out there. I would say the most traditional that people probably experience are the one-on-one interviews where they're either doing like a phone interview with another person on the line, a video interview, or even an in-person interview, or panel interviews. So we'll touch on the panel interviews probably first, but then I thought it
yeah,
would be
definitely,
yeah. And then I thought it
definitely.
would be interesting to kind of talk about some of those other formats that people might experience, which would be like giving a presentation during an interview or an asynchronous video interview, which is basically like a pre-recorded video interview that then has like pre-selected interview questions that candidates then record their answers to, and it gets sent to the recruiter or hiring manager to watch.
Just when
Um,
you think that you've got this stuff figured out, they come out with new trendy kind of things, and yeah, like that's what we're going to be talking about this episode. So we will start with panel interviews, but these are real. It's like, now that we've got all this new fancy technology, and now that AI is here, it's leading to, I guess, a bit of an explosion in new kind of formats and new ways of interviewing people. And I think I get the impression that a lot of this is also on screening interviews. There's more new and exciting types of screening interviews that job seekers are being asked to do that you might be unfamiliar with, because this is a relatively new thing. So yeah, so that's probably a good place to start. Is probably panel interviews, like you said. For people who don't know, a panel interview is when you're sitting down in person with a recruiter, but there isn't just one person on the other side of the table. There's more than one. There could be a whole line of people
yep,
on
it
the
could
other
be
side of
two
the table.
people, it could be nine people.
Yeah, that makes it really interesting. Sitting
Yep.
across the table from nine people all staring you down is a great feeling. And I don't think I've had nine, but I've had about seven,
Yep.
not for a job interview, but for another type of thing. You show up and it feels like an ambush, because
Yep.
you got seven people all united, all looking you up and down on one side of the table, and you're alone on the other side of the table, just you. And even remembering their names is like a major challenge. Instead
Yeah.
of calling everyone "Hey you," you know, knowing what their names are. There's practical difficulties like that. Uh,
Yeah.
did you want to lead us off here, Abby, on this one, or just
Yeah. So
sure?
when it comes to panel interviews, you'll either have it in person or virtually. When you have a virtual panel interview, that actually can be easier when it comes to kind of what you're talking about with names, because hopefully everyone that you see on your screen, I like to call it the Brady Bunch on your screen, will have, their little name at the bottom corner of like at least their first name. Sometimes they'll go in and they'll update their name to say like their name and their role so that you have a little bit of context of who they are. I found that when scheduling for panel interviews, at least from a recruiter perspective, I like to give candidates a little bit of insight of to who's going to be there, how many people to expect, what their names are, what their roles are, so that the candidates can do some research ahead of time. So if I, have a panel of three people and it includes a director, a senior manager, and a line level employee, I would put their names and their positions. That gives the candidate time before the interview to do some Google research, Google magic to figure out who these people are.
Google Magic?
Yes, figuring out why they might be in the interview, what types of questions they could potentially ask because of their position, all of those things. But sometimes that doesn't happen. And maybe more often than not, that doesn't happen. Candidates might just say, or candidates might just receive an email that says, you're scheduled for a panel interview at this time. Please show up prepared, and no other information. And so, if that is the case for a candidate, I think it's perfectly appropriate to send a follow up email to whoever scheduled your panel interview and see if they'd be willing to share who's going to be there, how many people are going to be there, titles of their positions, things like that, so that you can do the Google magic ahead of time. If you don't get that response, then you're kind of going in blind and you just got to kind of cross your fingers and hope everything goes well. And what's hard about panel interviews, regardless of if it's in person or virtual, is that most of these people on the panel will likely have the same information in front of them. And that means that their like affect and their ability to like emotionally interact with you is likely going to be reduced and maybe dampened a little bit. So if I'm
Like
sitting on a
talking to a gang of robots. Yeah, that's the
yes,
wonderful feeling. Yeah, that everybody loves.
yeah, well, and in a virtual interview, when you've got the Brady Bunch and they're all like,
Hmm.
looking at you straight faced,
Stone faced. Yeah.
yep, or like looking at a different screen or like doing something else, it is really hard to feel like they're engaged, which
Oh
can
yeah,
make
it's
it
very unwelcoming to do that. Yeah.
yes,
Hmm.
yes. So that can sometimes happen, especially if there's a lot of people in the room, whether it's virtual or in person. They've got their notebooks in front of them, they've got the questions that are going to be asked, they're ready to take their notes, but they're not really engaging with you as a candidate. And so it's up to the candidate to really bring the energy and not take it personal when there's not that engagement and active conversation. And that can be really tough. It's, like this mental challenge that you kind of have to get over during the interview. And I guess that could probably happen in a one-on-one interview as well. It's just a little less likely because when it's two people talking, it seems a little bit more conversational. There probably is a little bit more small talk and maybe, you know, eye
Yeah.
contact where you're kind of laughing about things that are not necessarily related to the actual interview.
Yeah, it seems like you kind of have to talk about the two things separate. There's the virtual panel interview, and then there's the in-person panel interview. For the in-person panel interview, my recommendation, not everyone can, wants to do this, but for the people who can, spend the equivalent of like $20, get yourself a business card. Just,
Mhm.
like your LinkedIn profile, you'll have your name, you'll have a tagline, and then you'll have a picture, and then you'll have your contact information, your email address, your, whatever. Just put that on a business card. And what you can do is when you are going to a panel interview in person, if you have like I have a chest pocket, but if you have like a pocket that is on yourself where you can put your business cards, when you're introduced to several people at once, which I hate because the polite thing to do, the protocol is to remember everyone's name and you call them by their name. If you can do that, congratulations, you're awesome. I've always had a problem with doing that. Yeah. So the problem is they introduce like 5 people to you and you don't remember a single person's name after it. But what you could do is if you have a business card, you take out your business card and you start passing them around. Like here's my card. Here's my card. Now, in most situations, especially if this is like, working, this is your on the employer's turf and these people are employees of the employer, they will have a business card for work. That'll be the cue for them to take out their business card and hand it to you. So if you are sitting across a table for them, what you can do is you can arrange these on the table so that if there's a line of 5 people, you could put 5 business cards in front of you, that correspond with the person. So if the person in the middle, you look down at the middle business card, it says John or whatever, then you can say, John, it's good to meet you, or thank you for the question, John, right? It's just a bit more personal. And then you know who you're dealing with. Because like Abby mentioned, if you're talking to the director of HR, the owner of the company, the recruiter, the person who's going to be training the new hire, and possibly some other manager type person who wants to contribute to the hiring decision making process, it's good to know who you're talking to. If you're talking to an accountant or a recruiter or the boss, you would probably tailor your answer a little bit, right? So that's the advantage in knowing who everybody is. And just maybe I'm an old kind of fogey, but I fall back on the business card thing when you're doing it in person and you don't have the little name tags on the
Yeah.
bottom of the screen.
And let's hope that in an in-person interview, they also take time to kind of go around the circle and
Mm.
introduce themselves to, like, let's say your name and your role, maybe why you're here. And so if they do that, I always recommend bringing like a padfolio to an in-person interview so that you have copies of your resume printed out that you can hand out to people if needed. You have copies of your business card if you've got business cards, and then you've got a little notebook. And what I like to do is I usually don't hand out my business cards, but I'll write down their names in the order that they're sitting on my notebook as they're introducing themselves. And
Yeah.
what's great about the business card is then you have like probably their email and a couple of other important contact things for them so that you can send a follow-up thank you and things like that. But definitely if it's an in-person interview and they go through introductions in some way, figure out how you can document their names in some format so that you don't blank or get an email from them afterwards and be like, no, how do I know this person again? So you'll definitely want to somehow document that.
Yeah, having that like pad of paper, or what I used to do was, they would sell like post-it notes in like the standard 3M post notes, and you'd get the bigger size, which was like a rectangle, and then you get the bigger size, which is like a bigger rectangle. So it's not quite an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, but it's like, yeah, there you go. It's like a little bit smaller. And what I'd have is I'd have that on the table in front of me with a pen in my hand. So if people are saying their names, you're like writing down, okay, John, Francine, or whatever people's names are. And then you can refer to that, and it helps. Business cards are still better for me because it says their title, and like that's really useful to have. But
and their email.
Yeah.
They instantly have their contact, and their
Yeah,
phone
you could
number.
follow up with them after if you wanted to, technically. Yeah.
Yep. Well,
Definitely.
and I think just like going off topic slightly when it comes to what to bring to an interview so that you're prepared, definitely bring your Padfolio where you can have a single place to store everything. If you're doing a presentation interview, which we'll talk about a little bit later, you'll have a place for your flash drive with your slides just in case something happens. I also recommend having notes available. I think it's perfectly acceptable to bring notes to an interview. You're
Yeah.
not going to have, paragraphs of your answers that you're going to read off robotically, but it's a way to, write down the acronym for STAR or CAR so that you remember how to answer those behavior-based questions. Maybe you
Absolutely.
have specific things that you want to touch on during the interview. So you write down some bullet points of those high hitting things that you know are going to help you stand out. So I look at it this way. If the interview panel or the interviewer is going to judge you for bringing notes to an interview, then that's probably a red
You
flag.
judge them right back. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and if you got this position and you had to go to a meeting, you probably would be expected to show up to the meeting prepared with notes and an agenda, or you would be prepared with a notebook to take notes about what's going on in the meeting. So if they have a double standard about requiring you to have everything memorized and not have notes during the interview, then that's probably just like a big culture red flag that is probably not a good fit.
I totally agree. I wholeheartedly agree with that. It's not weird to bring a pad of paper, or to bring like what was the term you used? What kind of file or note file?
Padfolio?
Padfolio. Yeah, like just a
Yeah.
folder with letter size sheets of paper in there, presumably copies of your resume, presumably a copy of the job description, maybe other notes you might have. The one caveat is that you can have notes in front of you, but don't be like looking down, reading them, and not making eye contact with people. It should be something that you only glance at, right? So you can
Absolutely.
have stuff on, but you're talking and then you look at something and you come back. You're not like doing this, reading an answer verbatim off a page or something. That would be bad. That would be
Yeah.
not something you want to do.
Well, and one of my most popular YouTube videos is about questions to ask at the end of an interview and having your questions pre-written out for you to reference when they ask you the question, which always comes up. Do you have any questions for us? Is a great way to be prepared to answer that question. They might have answered some of your questions during the interview, but hopefully you've prepped at least 3 to ask at the end. And, maybe you have time for one or whatnot, and you can prioritize which one to ask first, but have those written on your notes. So always be prepared. It demonstrates your professionalism, and it's not going to impact you negatively. And if it does, it's probably not the right fit for you.
I agree.
Now,
I agree with that. Oceana is here. Oceana says, how long after you apply for a job does it usually take to hear something back? I would say, I mean, obviously it's going to vary, but if people are serious and you're still in the running, it shouldn't be more than a week, I would say. What do you say to that, Abby?
it really depends. So that's like this is a total gray answer. There's no black
Hmm.
or white answer to this. So when it comes to jobs and when you can expect to hear back, what I always look for is a closing date of the job posting. And I would expect to hear back within 1 week of the closing date. That's like kind of my general rule for myself. Now, there are other types of jobs like in the United States, our federal government takes 3 months sometimes to get back to people. So that's like on the extreme end. Then you might have private companies that are actively recruiting for roles. They have maybe a lot of positions they're trying to fill that are under the same job title. You might apply to a job and the next day hear back from them. So it could be, within hours, and it could be weeks to months that you hear back. But my general rule is to try to look at the job posting, and if it has a close date, add a week to that, and that's by the time I would expect to hear back if I'm going to be considered a qualified candidate for the role.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so we were talking about panel interviews. Is there any more to panel interviews specifically? I guess this is both the virtual panel interview and the physical panel interview.
Yeah. Well, I think panel interviews are really popular because employers value collaboration in most cases. I'm going to say that as like a general stereotype of employers. It's probably in a lot of their, value statements and core values. So they probably value collaboration, and panel interviews allow them to evaluate candidates from multiple perspectives at once. So it's a way to get people who are decision makers or who have influence for the particular role in one place at one time, so that they don't have, like, let's say you said that you were in a panel interview, not necessarily for a job, but with 7 people. Let's say that was a 30-minute interview. It's much easier to get those 7 people together for 30 minutes one time than to schedule you 7 30-minute interviews with each of those people individually. So
Yeah.
a great way to make the best use of everyone's time, both the interviewers and the candidates.
Yeah, it could work out like that. There's also the factor like trying to get 7 people, especially if they're like decision makers, all together where someone doesn't have a meeting or doesn't have anything urgent they got to deal with. That's another thing that happens. But it's real fun in a negotiation kind of situation when you're trying to negotiate. You got 7 people staring you down. This is where you really need, to have done your homework and understand what your position is, and be negotiating from a position of strength rather than trying to bluff people, because it can be pretty challenging.
Have you ever done that where you've had to negotiate salary with panel? Like in
yeah, I wasn't with 7 people, but it was like, I don't know, like 4 or 5, something like that. Yeah, well, it's just a matter of like having done your homework and understanding what your position is. And then it's like, I don't care how intimidating people are going to try and be or whatever. It's, if you know what's right for you, I mean, you're not going to be talked out of doing something that makes sense.
Absolutely.
So I have not seen an argument break out among the panel. That would be like the next level kind of thing where you're talking about collaboration. You want to have people collaborating on a decision, and they're not going to voice their thoughts with the candidate present, but it would be interesting to see someone who tried and it really got heated, shall we say. The other thing about panel interviews is that as far as I'm concerned, what I would say to people is that they are exactly the same as talking to a single person. You conduct your side of it the same way. The only difference is that the questions might be coming from different people each time. Other than that, you would answer the same way. You give the same answers. There's nothing special you have to do. It's just that instead of talking to one person, you're talking to 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. It's nothing to be intimidated about. They will be asking you the same types of things that a single person would be asking you. So other than that, like it looks maybe a little bit more intimidating, but it really is the same thing, and it's nothing to worry about. That's what I would say about it.
Yeah. And it feels more intimidating because you have more eyeballs staring at you. But really, if you, take that deep breath and, one person asks you a question, you can, look them in the eye and answer the question that they asked you, while like then taking a break and glancing at the other people that might be in the room or on the screen. But it really is basically the same thing as a one-on-one interview.
Yeah. It's just superficial appearances. That's the only difference.
Yes.
We've got
one
another
thing that I really like about panel interviews, and then we'll come to this comment
Sure.
or this chat that came through, is it also is a good way to you as the candidate to observe how these people interact in their like kind of work setting. So it's a good way to gauge if there's a sense of psychological safety, if people are talking openly, if there's just one person dominating the conversation. And there have been a couple of clients that I've worked with during their interview preparation who will report back after their panel interview, and they asked a question about like the culture or what the biggest challenge for the position might be. And it was like radio silence where everyone was kind of like looking and like side eyeing, like waiting for one person to say something. And that gives you a good indication on, do people feel comfortable in their job? Is there, the person who is like the boss of all the other people, are they doing all of the talking? And is everyone else kind of like in the background saying like, no, this is not how our office works? So it's a great opportunity for you as a candidate to watch the body language and the interaction of all of the different panel members to decide, does this seem like a place that I could fit in?
Yeah, you get a taste of that. The most obvious thing is like how friendly people are, how personable they are. Sometimes, you go in and like, I don't want to say it's like walking into a bank, because bankers can be, especially if they're trying to sell you stuff, they can be quite personable. But um, you get a vibe of just how people are, and I mean, in my experience, I've been to places where people are like really friendly and they get along really well, and you could be on the panel. There could be the boss, and there could be an underling, and there could be like a entry level employee almost, like on the same panel. Um, and if they're all like joking and like they're professional, but they're all kind of warm and personable, and you know that kind of tells you something. Conversely, if you go to a place and like you just said, Abby, the boss does all the talking and everyone else is kind of like keeping their head down and they're keeping their mouth shut, and they're just sort of, it almost seems like they don't want to speak out of turn and they don't want to get in trouble for saying the wrong thing. You can pick up on some of the tension and the weirdness, that might exist in that workplace. So it gives you, I suppose, a little bit of insight into
Yeah,
that too.
absolutely.
Okay, we have this from Veronica Luna. It says, "Hi, I have an interview for an internal job posting on Wednesday. Your videos help me prepare." Okay, that's not really that much of a question. Well, best of luck to you, Veronica.
Yes.
Um, yeah,
Internal interviews can also be tough. And this, I guess, is another kind of off topic but relevant conversation. The difference between internal interviews and external interviews. So if I'm an external candidate, I'm not currently an employee of the company. If I'm an internal candidate, I'm currently an employee of the company. Internal interviews can almost be harder than external interviews because we as the candidate make assumptions about what the people that we're talking to know about us. So you want to approach your internal interview just like you would an external interview. Don't make assumptions about what the interviewers know about you. Don't make assumptions about the things that you've accomplished and that the interviewers know that you've accomplished those things. You want to still show up in a way that is thinking that these people don't know anything about me. It's my job to sell what I've done and who I am to them to determine that I am the best fit for this role versus these other internal candidates too.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's like, um, I was thinking along similar lines, like, if you're overly familiar and overly casual because this is where you work every day, and maybe these people are people you deal with every day, and the temptation is to sort of, not be as professional, as maybe you should be for a job interview, and it comes across, or it's taken as a sort of lack of seriousness or something like that. Maybe that's how it's taken. So
Yeah.
that's a great point, Abby. For that.
Particularly if it's like a promotion. So sometimes if it's
Mm,
more like a lateral or I'm still going to be an individual contributor, then I don't necessarily have to be as worried about that. But if I'm going from an individual contributor role to a role where I might be managing people or projects that then also have people associated with it, having that like buddy camaraderie, like
mm,
bumping elbows in the interview, probably won't give the best impression. So you want to show up
yeah.
as your most professional self. You can still have that, collegiality and friendliness with the interviewers. You'd want to have that in an external interview too. It just can be a dangerous trap when you are really comfortable with the people that you're interviewing with, especially if you're friendly with them. Maybe you have hung out with them outside of work before. You got to put on your professional face, and you don't want to get stuck in that spot where you could dig yourself a hole and not be able to get out.
It might feel like almost like the assumption is that they're interviewing you as a formality,
Mhm.
and you might maybe subconsciously be thinking like, well, they're just talking to me. They're not actually talking to other candidates for this. It's like they came to me first, and that's the natural thing. Uh,
Yep.
they could well be, I think you'd have to assume that they're talking to other people, possibly maybe even external candidates. They're going to be looking at other options. And so you want to keep that in mind. You're having to perform in such a way that, you know, you're going to come across favorably in relation to other people too that are maybe taking it a lot more seriously. There may be external candidates and they're doing this in a very formal way. So you don't want to be overly casual for it. So yeah.
Yep. So then kind
Um,
of to bring us back to our topic about different types of formats for interviews. I mentioned briefly presentation interviews. Bill, have you ever given a presentation for an interview before?
yeah. I did it in the context of teaching actually,
Mhm.
where you know, you go to an interview, and like I was never a teacher. This is like the first teaching job I ever got in my life, and I'm not a teacher. I don't have any educational credentials or anything, but what they did was they give you a standard job interview, and you know, I don't particularly think, at least the ones that they did with me were particularly insightful, but then they said, okay, you know, teach like a 5 minute lesson, go.
Mhm.
And I thought, great, you know, like a lot of managers, they figure like they maybe have a bit of an ego problem, and they think that, you know, just get me in front of the person and I'll just, you know, I'll just knock it out of the park. But I taught a lesson. I remember I taught it on like the basics of marketing or something, and I love that. It was like, instead of talking about how you can do something, you just demonstrate it, and
Yes.
that's the best way to show your value to people. You know, there's a
Yes.
lot of people out there that have a lot of skills but may not be very good at talking up their skills. When you can't demonstrate them, you have to sort of say how awesome you are, and that's a whole different thing. So the one experience that I had doing it, I thought it was great. It was like, wow, I don't have to try and convince you that I could teach a class when I have no educational credentials and I've never worked in education. It's great that you're allowing me to do this, so I can just show you that I can I can do this. So anyway, that was my experience. So I have a positive perception of it. I don't know if that would be universal,
Yeah,
but there
well,
you
and
go.
usually when it comes to presentation-based interviews, candidates are asked to like create and deliver a presentation on like a specific topic, a project, or a strategy. It's like usually something that's relevant to the role that they're applying for. And it's commonly used in positions that are leadership positions, marketing, sales, like education and training. And so before I went more full-time with my business here with Life Work Balance, I was in a training and development role and I had to do a presentation interview as well. You know, I signed up. I applied to be a trainer for an organization. And that was, I think, the third interview that I did was a presentation interview.
Okay.
Create a presentation on anything and train us on it. So it's really a great way for the employer to see you in action if it's something that you're likely going to be doing in the future. So they'll assess things like your communication skills, your ability to strategically think and synthesize information and present it in a way that is understandable to a variety of groups of people. It demonstrates how well you're able to organize your thoughts and convey ideas to groups. If you are asked to do a presentation for a role and you are terrified of public speaking, then that might be a sign that this position might not be for you. I haven't come across a role where they will ask you to do a presentation if presentations isn't a big part of that role. So that's one thing that I might make an assumption about is if it doesn't say it in the job description and they ask me to do a presentation for an interview, there's likely a chance that presenting in front of groups will be a part of this role. So that's an assumption that I would make. It, maybe you could
Yeah, it
clarify that.
it I would say it depends. I mean, definitely there are a lot of people out there, probably the majority of people out there where absolutely that applies. For some people, I would say that maybe the opposite might apply too. This could be a challenge. Like if you are terrified of public speaking, as you put it, um, you know, but maybe it's something you would like to do. You would like to overcome your phobia of public speaking and be very good at it. Maybe you could look at this as an opportunity, and rather than saying, oh, maybe I should just not bother with this job because it involves giving presentations and, you know, getting up in front of a group, and I'm no good at that. I've never done much of that and I don't want to do, you know. Or maybe if you do want to do it, you imagine yourself like, okay, in 20 years I'm going to be this expert professional, I'm going to be the boss, and, you know, I'll be able to get up in front of a room and, you know, talk freely and be comfortable. Maybe if that's an aspiration you have, you could look at it as a bit of a challenge and say like, okay, I'm just gonna go for this. Chances are I'm not going to see these people ever again. But if I maybe push myself, you never know. Maybe something wonderful will happen, and I'll do good at this. I'll do well, and then they'll hire me for it, and then I will have a further chance to hone my skills there. So you could also maybe take that approach, I suppose, if you're that type of person and you feel that way about what you're being asked to do. Um, you know,
Absolutely. Well, and I think there's also like thinking to yourself, okay, if I'm going to be in this role, I might not be giving formal presentations where I'm standing up and training people or educating them on a certain thing, but maybe I'll be asked to lead meetings with my small teams, and they just want to see how I'm set up an agenda and organize my thoughts to, share data that we got from this specific project. So it's likely presenting in some capacity, whether it's small format with your small team in meetings or larger format with groups of 50 plus people. It likely will be a part of your job. And so you'll want to use that as your opportunity to really demonstrate these more interpersonal skills that you have that are going to be relevant to your success in the role.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So,
And
yeah.
so when it comes to preparing for a presentation type interview, you'd want to clarify their requirements. Sometimes they just say present on any topic. Well, you might want to say, okay, well, how long is this presentation going to be? Do you want me to use any like resources like a PowerPoint presentation or handouts? Asking those types of questions will give you a good idea and them a good idea of like the kind of proactive work to make sure that you have a successful interview.
Are there
And
any limits on how loud I can raise my voice during my presentation? This
yes,
kind
can
of
I
thing.
have interaction? Can I call people up? Can I make jokes? What sorts of things can I
Can I
do?
phone a friend? Yeah.
Yep, yep. And then use your visuals wisely. Some people will create a PowerPoint presentation that's just a bunch of text that they just read from. That's probably not going to make the best impression.
Mm.
So you'll want to practice. You want to make sure you're within the time limit. I've been helping several people recently prepare for their presentation interviews. So they'll send me their presentation. I'll go through it. I'll give them some feedback on content. I'm not a subject matter expert in the stuff that they're presenting on or even the roles that they're working on. So I'm a great resource for people who are doing interviews that involve presentations because I can let you know how easy the information is to understand. I can let you know about the slides and is it too content dense? Does it make any sense? Do the pictures make sense that you've chosen to use? Things like that. So if you are doing a presentation interview and you want some feedback on it, consider reaching out to me. I'll put a little plug out there for some of my coaching sessions.
You make an interesting point about like, you know, if you're not like in your case, you're saying I'm not a content expert, but I can give you feedback. I can give you feedback, presumably from the perspective of someone who's not a content expert. Now, we were talking a moment ago about panel interviews, and the other thing that we didn't really kind of touch on in panel interviews is that the purpose, in theory, I believe, of doing a panel interview is that you're getting different perspectives. Obviously, in the real world, it works out that people don't trust other people, and they want to be in the room to see what a candidate is like, so they can give their 2 cents, right? But in theory, it should work like, okay, if we got the accountant in there and we got the person this person is going to be reporting to, and we've got the big boss here, they're going to be giving different perspectives. And the big boss might say, look, I'm not a content expert. They're hiring you to be a technician. I'm not a technician. I run the company. But, I can tell that, you have a passion about this, or you have great communication skills, or you have a great attitude, or, they're looking at more high level things, whereas maybe the recruiter or, the hiring manager are looking for more specific technical things. They're looking for different things. We didn't really touch on that. That's another reason why it's important to know who you're talking to in a panel interview. So just what you said there, Abby, just jogged my mind about the panel interview.
Yes, well, and all of this is probably interrelated in a variety
Yeah,
of
yeah,
ways. Yep.
exactly. Now, before we continue, I just want to do a couple of these things here. Okay, so here's a question from Wolvo Carlo. If you're offered the choice between live or in person, what should you consider? What would you say to that, Abby?
That is a great question. And I think it really depends. If it is a fully remote position or a hybrid position where you're going to be working more remote, I would say live, like video. That's kind of what I'm taking this as, either online or in person. Then I think online is acceptable. If it's an option or an opportunity to meet the team, meet people that you'll be working with in person. Maybe I would take advantage of an in-person interview. So it really depends. And you'll probably get a vibe, so to speak, from the people that you are working with to schedule these interviews. I would say if this is a hybrid position or an in-person position, going to an in-person interview will likely make more of a positive impression than doing an online interview. If it is a fully
Yes.
remote interview, or excuse me, a fully remote position, and they offer you an in-person option for interviewing, that seems a little odd if it's like a fully remote position. You can take advantage of it if you'd like, but you probably won't be judged if you decide to do virtual. What do you think, Bill?
I I'm tempted to say in person, like just hands down. Like I understand maybe the temptation to want to do a remote interview if they give you the option, because let's face it, it's much more convenient, it's quicker, it's easier. You're maybe not as out of your comfort zone as you might be if you have to go to somebody's building somewhere and into some weird room with all these weird people. Like, you'd feel more comfortable at home, in your space doing it. But I think that just as a general rule, um, in person is the way to go. If
Yeah,
nothing else, it signals that you're not afraid of meeting people and going to their location. So you never know what's going on. If that job might have turned from a purely remote position to a hybrid position or something, and that might have been a real point of contention in the future, they would like to see that, like, okay, you're not averse to coming down and interacting with people, at our main location, and that counts in your favor.
I would agree. I would agree. And I would say probably in this day and age, because of the pandemic and everything going remote for non-essential services going remote, most people probably would prefer virtual just because of the convenience factor. But it really does show that you're willing to go above and beyond, and you can meet people in person. You're probably more memorable if you come in person. You probably have an opportunity to do a little bit more small talk, connect with the people who are doing the interviews with you. Maybe you walk with them somewhere. There, you might get a tour of the office that you wouldn't normally get if you were a virtual. So I would agree that if you have the option to do in person, take advantage of it. At the same time, if you are the type of person who's feeling a little bit more averse to that, if it's a remote position, fully remote, it's probably not going to hurt you if you choose a remote interview.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
We have another one here. Let's see here. Let's do this. Johnny says, I have an interview tomorrow. How to ask why it's open and be cool about asking. Abby, your vids are great. I think you should definitely
Thanks,
speak to
Johnny.
this. That was a really popular video of yours, I think, right? Asking the questions.
Yes, yes. So I think you can just say, tell me a little bit about the history of this position. And it's basically a behavior or situation based question directed to the interviewers. It's open ended. It gives them some opportunity to talk about maybe who was in it before. Maybe it's a new position. If it was filled before and it's now empty, you can ask, tell me about the person who was in this position last. Why did they choose to leave? Maybe they got promoted internally, and that demonstrates some internal career growth opportunities for you within the company, which is great and what you're looking for. Maybe they were not a great fit and they were like, this person wasn't a great fit. Here are some of the things that made them not a great fit. And then you can check off, do I have those same personality traits or things that could make me not a good fit? Or am I the opposite? Am I a better fit than the person who was previously in this position? So tell me a little bit about why this position is open. Very, like not confrontational, not prying too much. You let them tell you what they want to tell you, and then you can dig a little bit deeper if you feel like you have some additional questions and concerns about why the position's open.
That's a great way of putting it. Okay, so we talked about panel interviews. We talked about some other stuff. What are some other trends? Because this is talking about interview trends revealed, some of the more newer types of interviews that people are doing these days. There were other things too, weren't there?
Yes, like project-based assessments. So this might not be a specific interview, but this might be where you're given like homework to do before an interview. And this is to really demonstrate like work samples. So you might be tasked with completing a project or a work sample that's relevant to the role before, maybe even during an interview, or maybe even after an interview. So employers use these types of assessments because they want to see practical skills in action rather than relying solely on resumes and interviews. So this is similar to a presentation interview, but not exactly the same. So I've done project-based assessments as a recruiter where, let's say that I'm hiring for an administrative role and this person is going to be working with Excel. There's actually like tests that you can have people do in Microsoft Excel to see how well they can perform using Excel. I can subjectively say on my resume that I'm an expert in Microsoft Excel, and then I get into the actual job and I only know how to enter things into each of the cells within Excel, but I don't know how to do formulas or things like that. That might make me not a great fit. So people might want to have a project-based assessment where you complete an Excel assessment. Another type of assessment that I've done is as a recruiter hiring for recruiters. One of the things that we did from our employer perspective is we would design job postings, job descriptions, questions on the job application. And so we would, send a hypothetical job posting to a potential applicant who wants to be a recruiter with our company. And we would ask them to generate 5 questions that they could have as a supplemental questionnaire for this application. And that helped us determine, their critical thinking, their problem solving, what types of things are they interested in knowing about candidates when candidates are asking or answering questions as a part of their application. So there might be some sort of assessment. You might be asked to create a strategy or a presentation, or like with that recruitment that I was doing, questions to ask on a job application. So this really is a way to showcase your problem solving skills and that you can actually do the work that will be required of you in the job.
There's another aspect to this too that I've come across, which is that like there are some employers that I believe abuse this kind of thing, because like there's a difference between giving someone a test, like an evaluation, and giving them actual real work to do for that employer. Because what I've seen in the past, and I'm sure you have too, Abby, is um, there's a little bit of a loophole here where you get unscrupulous employers that want to get work done for free. And so rather than contract a consultant or something to go and just outsource that project or that work, instead they'll post a job saying we're looking for someone who has skills in consulting that can do this, have people show up, do interviews, and then say, okay, I'm going to give you this assessment and we're going to give you this work to do. And then we want you to return it when it's done. And then we'll evaluate what you've done and then contact you further. And really there is no job. It's a fake job. It was all just a ruse to get that person to do the work for free. They return the work assignment. They don't hear anything else. The company has that work that's now been done. They've obtained it for free without paying this person anything. And you're getting around things like minimum wage laws and stuff because you're getting people to work for you, but you're not paying them. Right. And then in addition, it's a bit of fraud in the sense that you're saying that there's a job at the end when all along you never intended to hire anyone. So you got to just be on your guard. I believe that if they give you some kind of evaluation, that's fine. But if they say, we need you to do this actual real work for us, yep, there can be issues with that.
Totally. And I've heard of that happening too. Luckily, I haven't worked for any organizations who have taken advantage of employees or potential employees like that. But that is certainly something to keep in mind. Now, one thing to look for if you're given an project-based assessment or work sample as a part of your interview process, most of the ethical organizations that will be asking candidates to do this will give you like a time frame to spend on it. Like, please spend no more than 1 hour on this project. That gives you kind of a signal that they're not really looking for you to do an entire project for them, or they're going to then use your intellectual property and get free work out of you. There are even some organizations that will compensate the candidates going through the interview process if it requires them to come, multiple hours or multiple days, whatever that might look like.
That's good.
Keep those things in mind, but it certainly can get a little bit dicey out there. You want to be sure that when you're applying to jobs, that it's a legit job, that you're doing your research, and you won't necessarily know until the very end if you're like offered a position, but there will probably be signs based off of communication, level of work and detail they're expecting from you, things like that. Now, I've worked with a couple of candidates recently who are applying to, director level roles that are asked to create like a strategy. And for
Yep.
that,
Yep.
the employers will say, who are doing the interviews, please spend no more than 2 hours on this. And this is a high level strategy. We're not expecting you to go into extreme detail because you just don't know the position or a company that well yet.
Please spend no more than 10 business days doing this assessment for us. Yeah.
Red flag. Don't do it. So be aware of some of those things. And if you are asked to do an assessment or an assignment and they don't include that, it's perfectly acceptable to follow up with an email or a phone call and say, how long are you expecting this to be? How long are you expecting me to spend on this? Ask some of those questions, because if it's a legit role and you'll be asked to do some of those same types of work samples in the role, you would also be expected to ask some of those clarifying questions for your normal day-to-day tasks.
Yeah, and to that point, we have CM says, if they ask me to provide free work in the guise of looking over my work product, it's an immediate no for me. Yes. Like to your point earlier, Abby, you gave the example of like, taking an Excel test, like to evaluate your skills using Microsoft Excel. Like if they give you a test or they say like, okay, here's some sample data, take it and, manipulate it this way, that'll be one thing. But if they sort of give you something and say, okay, here's some like actual sales data from our company. Now we want you to reconfigure it and, analyze it and draw some conclusions and write a report and return it to us. It's like that for me, that would be red flags, because that's actual work they can use.
Yep.
It's not just some evaluation that doesn't mean anything. This is something now that you've done some real work for them. So I would be aware of that red flag if you're being asked to do anything like that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if you are unsure or you're getting weird feelings about it, ask the question, see how they respond. If they're pushing back, if they get defensive about it, more red flags.
If they snap like a twig. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the fun part.
Run away in the opposite direction if that happens.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. You got to protect yourself from stuff like this because there are a lot of shenanigans going on these days, especially with like the fake job stuff.
Yes.
The better we are at spotting these things and steering clear of them, the more we can concentrate on like actual real opportunities. Okay. So we covered several things. These are interesting. What else do we have for interview trends?
Yeah, so I'd be curious for the people who are kind of watching. Do you see how many people we have tuned into us right now?
We have 34 by the looks of things.
Great. So of the 34 of you who are watching right now, have any of you done a video interview that's like a pre-recorded or an asynchronous video interview? And this is really where candidates will record video responses to preset interview questions that hiring managers or recruiters review later. This is something that's getting to be more popular. I personally have never done this as a candidate. I just don't know if it's the type of organizations I'm applying to or what that might look like. But these are things that are coming up and are becoming more popular because it is allowing recruiters to save time, and is typically used more as like a screening tool. So it allows candidates to be evaluated more effectively and efficiently without like scheduling constraints. They might say, we're doing our first round of screening. Please complete this asynchronous or video interview with these pre-recorded questions by this date. You might have a couple of chances
as an interviewer. I would love that, because then I can like listen to the answer to their first question, and then I can just not watch the rest if I don't like what I see, and I can just ignore everything else they did. I imagine that's why that's the motive behind doing things like this.
Yeah. Well, it really does streamline things. If let's say I'm a recruiter for Amazon or Google or these large companies that are highly coveted for getting into because they're just, it's great to have on your resume.
And they milk that, don't they? Holy crap.
Yes. Yeah. And so let's say I'm a recruiter for one of those huge companies that has, tons of employees and lots of applicants. I would want to use something like this. I would want to use a program that can really streamline the process. I might get thousands or tens of thousands of applications for a single role. So how do I effectively evaluate those? Well,
Instead of getting like what, 8 interviews out of those 1,000 applications, now you could get 50 interviews, because all you're really doing is you're watching the first 2 minutes of each one and then deciding if you're gonna persist with it. You know what I mean?
yes,
So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing from the perspective of the job seeker, but that's probably what the motivation is. I would theorize.
yes. Well, and usually you get a question and then it gives you time to record an answer. Sometimes you can re-record if you've messed up. Sometimes you can't re-record. It really depends on the platform. But it really comes down to the employer wanting to save time and get through a high number of applications quickly to then decide. Now, there might also be some uses from the employer perspective with AI, where AI could, generate or transcribe responses, and then you can like search through for keywords and terms, things like that. So that's like a whole other conversation with how the employers might be using
Yeah,
AI.
they could just get AI to like, do the entire selection process while they're at it.
Yeah,
That's
might
where
as
it's
well.
going. Yeah, well, it's
Um,
stupid. It's like I don't know. I mean, like, look, this is. I mean, okay, it's easy to evaluate everything in terms of efficiency. To say like, look, this way we save time.
yep.
Um, and then we can have further efficiency gains by not even having the recruiter watch the videos submitted. We could have AI watch them and then look for, do they use this kind of language, or do they have this kind of demeanor, or, what would be most efficient? We could just let AI just select a candidate. I mean,
Yeah.
that would be the biggest efficiency gain right there.
Well,
But,
and actually,
you know,
that might make candidates feel better about the interview process, because when it comes to our human judgment, there's a lot of biases that are in play that we're not even aware of. And if we are hiring people purely based off qualifications, AI can certainly make that judgment for us.
yeah,
Um,
and then that way we can remove any trace of, human element or individuality from this entire thing. And usually the way these things go is that, yeah, you get efficient, and then ultimately it becomes completely self-defeating,
yeah,
because, you're not handpicking the people that you want that fit in with what your your credo is of how business should operate and what skills and what traits are required. You know what I mean?
yes. Well, and that's why interviewing is so hard. And I feel like we've talked about this on a past stream with
Hmm.
like why job interviews are never going to be purely about qualifications. Because I might have 100 people who are equally qualified. Well, how do I then narrow that down to who's truly the best fit for the role? And a computer likely can't make those choices for us. And so that's what I don't really like about these asynchronous video interviews, because it's really weeding out some potentially great people who just might not be doing the video interview, the pre-recording well. Um,
Well, that's the thing. I mean, look, I'm not going to do this, but I'm going to say it's tempting to get into a conversation about how every type of efficiency gain in this process is ultimately self-defeating, for partly for the reasons you just mentioned. It's like you've got to program it and say, this is what we're looking for, and we're looking for these skills and that. And the problem is, in reality, it's just not that simple.
mhm.
And even if it were, you've initiated a sort of cat and mouse type game where you're saying, okay, this is what we want, everything else don't bother applying. So you get everyone showing up with that, and then you have to determine if it's legitimate or not. It's the eternal cat and mouse kind of thing.
Yep.
And humans will always have an edge, at least with the current technology, they'll always have an edge on spotting this kind of stuff than AI will. So I mean, you can get into all that stuff, but
Yeah. Well, and if
um,
I can just say the
yeah,
right thing that will convince the computer that I'm the best
there
fit,
you go.
then it,
You could argue we practically have that with keyword matching in resumes. You know, Forget about what I have to say for myself. They're looking for this. That's what I say. I get the interview. So like that's a whole thing. So you got these two sort of forces always pushing against each other.
yes. Well,
Um,
and companies love to hear efficiency. It's going to save us money. It's going to save us time. So that's why they start to buy into these types of processes. And as someone who hasn't personally used it on either side, as an employer or an potential candidate, I don't feel like I can truly talk about how well it works. But it just seems like it's kind of one of these scams that a company has come up with to like make money off of employers who would rather spend money on a fancy software than on people to do the
Yeah.
job.
And this has always been, since the 1970s, this has been HR's big problem as far as I'm concerned, because they're schizophrenic. On the one hand, they treat people like numbers, like human resources, just the
Yep.
way you would treat inventory or, raw materials, they treat people. But yet on the other hand, they also acknowledge that people are people. They have motivations. They have things that cause people to harass others or have poor emotional intelligence or not be good at negotiating. They are individuals with their own thoughts and feelings. So they keep yo-yoing back and forth between treating you like a number and treating you like a real person. And it just doesn't jive. That's the problem. So you've got these two opposing forces always kind of battling each other. And now, like, we're seeing it in the recruitment and selection process here. So, it's always the way it's going to be, and it's going to be like this for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I don't see these types of platforms and systems going away. And so as job seekers, we somewhat have to embrace it and just go through the process.
Yeah, we got to accept it. We can rail against it, but at the end of the day, if you do want a job that's behind this kind of gatekeeping, you have to dance to their tune. There are other ways to get jobs that don't involve playing this game, but if you want to get these jobs, you got to play this game.
Yep.
Coming back to this type of interview, personally, I would find this type of interview more nerve-wracking than the others, because like all I know is that I can do live streams and I'm reasonably comfortable. But if you have to record a video, I end up doing like a million takes, and you're super critical of it, and then the process takes way longer than you would ever imagine it should. So I
Yeah.
imagine there's a lot of job seekers that are having to deal with this.
Yes.
So they spend much more time on it than they would in like an actual real-time interview.
Yes. Well, and Amazed put in the chat that they've done pre-recorded video interviews and they could submit a response up to 3 times. So like,
Oh, okay.
talk about the pressure of getting like the right response. Like from an
Yeah.
interviewer perspective, and this is, I can see maybe my rose-colored glasses. I'm hoping that it's a little bit more conversational and not as robotic or forced or like prepared. You want it to be a little bit more organic. And these types of asynchronous pre-recorded video interviews are not that way.
And the really in-demand employees will probably, I suspect, not subject themselves to this kind of thing. They will just go for, much easier methods of being hired because they don't have to submit themselves to this kind of thing. They'll reach a point where that will occur if it hasn't
Well, I
already
would
been
say
reached.
like one way to get around this type of interview would be networking. If
Of
I
course,
know
yeah.
someone who works for Google, and I know that Google might do these pre-recorded interviews, which I don't know if Google does these types of pre-recorded interviews. I'm making an assumption there because I've
Yeah.
never applied for Google. But let's say that I know someone at Google. I might be able to get a referral through my network of knowing that person and like circumvent these pre-recorded interview steps to
Yep.
like talk to a real person. And that's where
Absolutely.
networking is so valuable, but it's daunting.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm going to put another thing out there, which I wasn't intending to do, but the moment has arrived. I would say that, the role of people like us, can also be expanded to tuning people into things like networking.
Yep.
So not only can you assist job seekers in navigating this process, the sort of official recruitment and selection process as practiced by corporate enterprise and their HR departments, but being able to go around some of these processes and take advantage of things like networking, tune people into this so that they can create a lot of sometimes far superior opportunities for themselves by accessing that sort of vector. I think that that's something that we can assist people with in the future. So
Absolutely.
definitely.
And I think that when it comes to networking, it applies to career changes. Maybe I am in administration of some sort and I want to go to nursing or, some completely different field that I'm not in. Well, I want to start talking to people that I know who are in the healthcare or nursing field. And then just to learn about the field to see if it might be a good fit for me. And that then might eventually build my relationships with those people to where they can then refer me or put me directly in contact with a hiring manager once I go through the process of, getting my certifications and education for that if I decide to go to that field.
If
So
you're talking
networking
to
is
the right
valuable.
people, sorry to interrupt, but if you're talking to the right people, they'll probably a lot of times be one and the same. The person you're
Yep.
talking to, if you're doing an informational interview or something with them, will also be someone in a position where they can hire someone like you. So, you know, just the fact that you showed up and did this, that
Mhm.
elevates you above the crowd of all the other candidates that have not done this. And if that person ever does need to add someone to their team or whatever, I mean, who would they hire? Would they hire a stranger who they never met, like you just sent in an application, or would they hire the person that they've already met? They've already got a sample of how professional they are, how dedicated they are, how easy they are to converse with. Um, who is asking very intelligent questions that clearly signal that they understand the field and they understand, the things that matter. Who would you go to first? You'd probably go to that person you've already met. Um, so just the act of doing it is opening doors for you. So anyway,
Yep. Yep.
but yeah.
Absolutely.
Anyway, we talked about several types of things. Was this it? Because this was like the one that, I mean, I've never done this type of interview before. This is like really new. I know we've had the capability of doing this for like 20 years or something. You could submit little videos and things of yourself, but for some reason that never really took off. At least,
Yeah.
yeah, have you seen much of that? Like say 10 years ago? It's only really right now that people are kind of getting more into it.
Yeah, I would say probably a couple of years before the pandemic was when it
Hmm.
started to get pretty popular. And I think that there's probably a certain type of organization that really values it, and then a certain type of organization that just isn't taking advantage of it or interested in using it. And so I think we're probably going to be that way. I don't see this type of interview being like the first step in every single job application moving forward
Yeah.
anytime soon, if ever. So it's something that you might encounter depending on the type of organization you apply to or the types of role that you're trying to apply to, but it's also something that you might never encounter.
Yeah, I would suspect that the companies that are probably taking advantage of this would be ones that have a lot of entry level type jobs,
Mhm.
and you have a lot of positions that are the same. Like you have a great number of like one type of position. You have
Yep.
a quantity because you're not going to employ this probably for like a one-off type position where it's customized. You would, I imagine they're combining AI with this as the big real thing that's boosting this now. And
Mhm.
then you program the AI with exactly what they're looking for. And if you have to hire like 200 of those people like all at once in a batch, then this is probably where they're employing this kind of technique, I'd imagine.
I would agree. I would agree. And I would say, like, when it comes to AI, like during live interviews and even these maybe pre recorded interviews, it's probably doing like facial expression recognition, sentiment analysis, things
Yeah.
like that. And I would say that if a company were to rely on AI to decide who to hire, there's probably going to be some problems.
Yeah.
Not
For
probably,
anything
right?
above that level, yeah, like above entry level or certainly above worker level, you run into all kinds of problems.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think there's like a couple of other types of interviews that could be encountered. One is like a behavioral assessment or simulation. And I think you have brought this up a couple of times where, like, let's say hypothetically you're in an interview and then like one of the interviewers gets a little belligerent. Like, how do you handle that?
Yep. A bit
I would
aggressive.
say,
Yep.
yeah, aggressive. Maybe they like raise their voice or they're like really contradicting, or maybe they're saying something that is like meant to be like demoralizing or demeaning, and they're just trying to see how you might respond. So I wouldn't say that that's something that would happen in a lot of interviews in an unexpected ways. I would say that if you are going to be doing a behavioral assessment or a simulation, they're going to warn you up front and let you know that this is a simulated workplace scenario where we want to see how you would handle a specific situation, like conflict resolution, leading a meeting. Let's say you get on a phone call with a customer and they're really upset. Like, how would you talk them through that? So it really reveals how candidates might think on their feet and approach challenges in real time. But I would say in most cases, you'll be notified ahead of time that this is an assessment or a simulation. This isn't like how the boss is really going to react in the real workplace.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like it seems like they had more of those in the past, like stress interviews.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how those were done or are done. Like you say, like would they notify? It almost seems like it might negate the purpose if you sort of advise someone like, okay, you know, we're going to do a stress interview. That means that, you know, we're going to get all up in your face.
Yeah.
And, you know, just so you know, we don't mean it, you know, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, would that really assess anything accurately? Probably not, you know? Um, I,
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm just, but like
Well, and
where
what
I've
comes
seen
to
it,
mind
it's,
for me
Mhm.
is like, let's say that I'm going to be working for a call center. They might have a recording. You know how when you could call
Okay.
like
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
helpline and they say this might be recorded for training purposes. Well, they might have a recording from a real customer who was irate that they play you a little snippet of during the interview. And they say, how would you respond? That might be an
It's just
example of
all bleeped. Yeah.
yeah, just the whole time. They might ask you, how would you respond? Or like what would be your typical like strategy for handling a customer like this?
Yeah.
That's what I would expect when it comes to these types of behavioral assessments or simulations. I wouldn't expect it to be like, the interviewer is going to yell at you. How are you going to respond? Those
Yeah.
types of
Yeah.
stress interviews, I don't think are as popular or happen very often these days.
Yeah, like when I've only seen that like a couple of times, and the times when I've seen it, it's been much more organic, and it's not like people get up in your face and they insult you or something. It's like where you're asked a question by an interviewer. Usually it's not a recruiter. At least in my experience, I haven't seen a recruiter do this. It's almost like they would train you not to do this kind of thing, right? But
Yeah, they should.
yeah, yeah. Like say it's like a hiring manager, and they would say like, tell me how would you respond to this situation or something, and then the job candidate gives an answer, and then it comes back to the hiring manager where they say something to the effect of like, no, that's not good enough. I'm asking you, this, or try again, or like something of that nature, where they're really putting the screws to you. It's not necessarily that they're insulting you or they're
Mhm.
like getting all up in your face. They're turning red and they're apoplectic and, they want to see how you respond. It's that they're not taking your answers at face value, or they're indicating that they're insufficient in some way, and or they're challenging you on something you say about yourself. So you say like what did you say a moment ago? You said like, oh, I'm an Excel expert. But then when they give you a test, like, let's find out for real. So maybe in the course of your interview, you tell the hiring manager, I'm an Excel expert. And then maybe the hiring manager says like, okay, well, in that case, how would you manipulate Excel to do this or something? Do you do this method or that method? And then
Walk me
use
through how you would create a pivot table.
yeah, or something like that. And then you say something and they say, well, no, that doesn't work like that. Uh, you can't do that. We all know you can't do that. So how would you do, it maybe puts the candidate in an uncomfortable position that, I'm being challenged on something I wasn't expecting to be challenged about. And I don't know how to respond. Do I tell the person they're wrong? I mean, I'm trying to make a good impression here. Or do I sort of just kind of demurely kind of, okay, yeah, maybe you're right, but then I look bad, and it's those types of questions that come up. And, I mean, how often do you have to coach someone? I mean, maybe you do. Like, how often do you have to coach someone through a situation like that?
Yeah, and I would say that those situations don't happen very often. I would say
Mm,
from an interviewer perspective, this is what might go through my mind. Let's say that I ask the question, like an Excel specific question that I say, okay, if you're an Excel expert, I'm anticipating that you're going to answer it in this way. And if they're completely off the mark, I might just go, interesting, and like note that and move on and say, this person is not being honest about their experience or their expertise. Like I might have to do some additional follow-up questions to get some clarification. We may
mm,
want to do an additional assessment to really get an idea of how, well they understand the specific program. So, and maybe that's like the anti-conflict person in me specifically, but I would imagine that most interviewers would probably just like note that and be a little bit more hesitant and suspicious moving forward, but not necessarily actively challenge it during the interview.
Yeah, like I've like going for executive jobs, I've had a lot of people challenge me,
Mhm.
and one I think it's an effect of if you're jumping industries. People over here do it a certain way, but people over there do it a certain other way. And like, for example, I remember going to, it was like in Alberta or something. They flew me out for an interview in Alberta, and I was doing a panel interview with several people, and one of them was an accountant. And I've got a thing about accountants because like I mean
You've had lots of
all
great experiences with
yeah, yeah. And but like salespeople have one perspective, accountants have
accountants.
another, finance people have another, operations people have another. And between all of them, you kind of get a sort of view of what the reality is. But everybody's got their sort of skewed perspective. And I remember they asked me a question, something to do with like budgeting, like, what's your approach to making a budget for your operation or whatever? And I was saying, well, I learned from my mentor, who was this person who founded the company, and they really didn't do formal budgets. They kind of kept it loose, and they were able to take advantage of opportunities when they could, and any kind of opportunity they would discuss it, and we would decide. And I obviously struck a nerve with this accountant because they vehemently like challenged me on that and said like absolutely not, you can't operate that way, or whatever. So it's like it put me in that situation. It's like, do I say, sure, you're absolutely right, or do I challenge them and say, well, I'm very sorry to contradict you, but we did do it that way. We were very successful. You know, I've had a chief operating officer challenge me over some technical points and saying, you can't do this, and I said, well, sorry, I do. This is how I do it, and it does work if you try it this way. But like, what do you do in that situation? It seems like whatever you do, you're rocking a hard place, you know,
Yeah.
very challenging positions. And the only real thing that I could ever think of to mitigate that kind of situation is to say to people, like, you respond, it's very hard to do. I can't do this, but I know some people who can, where you respond with a smile and you say, absolutely, you're absolutely right. I understand precisely how you could think that, because it is kind of, so you start by agreeing with them, even
Mhm.
though like it feels like a little piece of you is dying inside. Absolutely, it's ridiculous that some people can operate this way, but then you gradually sort of make a kind of subtle case for, but it can work in certain situations here that maybe you guys don't normally see. In other industries, we have to deal with this thing. And so it can work sometimes,
Yeah.
but you're absolutely right. That's usually an exception to the rule or something. Now if you can do that successfully, I'd give you a medal, because I'm not very good at like hiding my emotions as well as I should. But I know some people that are brilliant at that, absolutely brilliant. They have such like emotional intelligence and things that they can do this. And it's like, wow, that's how I learned this. I saw some people show this off, and it's just incredible, you
Well, and
know?
I think that's like perfect advice, right? If you're in a situation where suddenly you're getting challenged, you don't want to fight fire with fire. You want
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
try to de-escalate the situation. And usually you do that through like acknowledging the other person's experience, agreeing with them, in some way, shape, or form. If it's wrong, you don't necessarily want to agree with them, but you can say like, "Oh, I totally see how it might be that way with this organization." And I was just using my past experience with this organization that's different, and that tells me that I'll need to maybe learn this organization's way of doing things, take it on a case by case basis, things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
But
like you say yes, I say no. Now they can't both be right. Somebody's wrong. Now, if I maintain that you're wrong, I lose the interview. If I acknowledge that I'm wrong, then I also lose the interview because I don't know what I'm talking about, and you've discovered me. That's how it looks like, So very challenging situations like that,
one, I just
and
put in the chat
you know,
to read Seven Habits of Highly Effective People.
let's put this
And
stuff up on the screen here. I'm just going to do this one here.
yep. Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. I feel like I recommend this book at least once a day. There is one of the habits is thinking win-win, which is getting into this mindset that it doesn't need to be win-lose. Like,
Yep.
yes, no, I'm right, you're wrong. And so when you're thinking win-win, you're kind of saying like, yes, and. So it doesn't have to just be your way. It doesn't just have to be my way, but there's probably a middle ground that meets both of our needs and is more effective than something else. It's a complete mindset shift. It only takes one person, you, to think win-win. And in an interview, it's a great way to kind of demonstrate that type of thinking.
Absolutely. Yep. There was some other stuff that I should have been more attentive. I just got a little bit too wrapped up in the moment there. Recently, we got stuff from Way saying, let's see, there's several posts from Way here.
Yeah.
What about this one here? I think make the interviews happy and be the same frequency for. Okay, yeah, just general good vibes. That is a good thing. You want to try and um, you know encourage people to not be so formal. There's several things you can do there. It starts by having like a smile on your face, not like, kind of doing that. And yeah, the game face kind of, kind of very stern and commanding, just more warm and welcoming and try and get people to loosen up a little bit. I think everyone appreciates that.
Well, and I think there's a psychological trick that, it maybe isn't so much of a trick, but when someone does more talking, they usually feel better about themselves, which is why it's so vitally important to ask questions at the end of the interview to get the interviewer talking. It's likely during this interview that you, as the interviewee, have been doing a lot of talking, answering these questions. So if you can get the interviewer talking and have them feel like they've contributed to the conversation, you're interested in them, they've been able to share a little piece of their experience and their story, they'll likely walk away from the interview feeling better about it than if they don't get questions asked to them.
Yeah, I agree. And here's one from George. So sometimes it comes down to, do I want to work with it? Absolutely. Yeah. But I would just be personally, my reaction to that is I'd just be wary about being a bit too arrogant, because if you come down to a job interview, unless you are an idiot and don't know what you're doing, by definition, you are interested in the job that they're offering. Right. So if you go down and make a big show of like, well, I'm clearly not interested in this, it just, not only do you walk away with nothing, but you just annoy everybody and waste everyone's time. And, it's like, you want to try and avoid that. So you have to acknowledge that I risk this particular transaction, at all times.
Yeah. And it kind of, it's like that delicate balance. You're like on that wire balancing on one side versus the other. You don't want to suddenly turn into a people pleaser where you're just agreeing to everything and you're letting all of your values and morals go to the wayside to just like show up as the ideal candidate, even though that's not who you are. And at the same time, if you aren't enthusiastic and eager and excited about the position, the interviewers will be able to recognize that. And it also goes both ways. If you're in an interview and the interviewers are like, next question, and they're like not interested in the conversation at all,
That's never happened before.
Like, then you're probably thinking like, this might not be the best fit for me. If they're not excited about me and they don't want me, then I might not want them either.
Yes, I agree. I think we have our quote of the day. In Rome, we should be as the Romes. That's our quote of the day. Thank you.
Yes. Now, really, I think the last type of interview that kind of I prepared for our live stream today was group interviews. Have you ever been a part of a group interview?
No, I haven't. I know that they do that at the entry level for different things. Being evaluated as a group. Sorry, I have been a part of that, if that's part of it. Like when I was like, I don't know, under 25 years old or whatever. But I know that there's more sophisticated type of groups interview where you do group activities as part of the interview. You're actually interacting with each other, with the other candidates, and you're being assessed together, presumably.
And I've only done one group interview before, and it was actually for my master's program. And it was very strange because there was a limited number of spots for the program and more applications than spots. And so really it's where like multiple candidates are interviewed at the same time. And then they like work on tasks and they interact while being observed by the decision makers.
Hmm.
And so employers are using this type of group interview to gauge interpersonal skills, leadership, teamwork abilities. And the one interesting thing about my group interview that I vividly remember was they asked us at the very end of the day, who would you not bring to this program? Like, of the people you've worked with. And it
Hmm.
felt so awful to do that. I like basically
I don't want to
repeated,
work with them. Yeah.
yeah, they should not be allowed into this educational program.
We got to
So
thank HR for bringing us these wonderful feelings of,
yeah,
it's just silly. That's just creating a ton of awkwardness. It's like, why? What's the point of that?
yeah,
You know?
and like divisiveness from the beginning. We want to
Yeah.
create an environment where we can work together and be collaborative and really support each other. And if I start my very first interaction or one of my first interactions with this company fighting for
Yeah.
my spot and trying to demoralize and put other people down, then maybe that's what they're looking for.
Yeah,
Maybe they're
that
looking
that
for
gives you an
people.
insight into what you're in for. I mean, question, are they evaluating you as a group and then they're going to hire the group, or are they using the group interaction to assess you as an individual and then they'll hand pick the individuals? Do you know which of those two it was
Well,
in
so it
your
was
case?
for a graduate level program. So it
Mhm.
was to not for hiring. So it was to say who is going to be accepted into our school, basically.
Okay. Well, do
And
they
so
accept the group or do they accept the individuals?
it would be the individuals from the group. And so there were some
Okay.
people who were not accepted into the program after the group interview.
Oh, okay. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, that's strange. I mean, I guess that's education, so they have
Yeah.
their particular quirks on how they do things. But yeah, that's strange. That doesn't feel very welcoming. That feels pretty icky, to be honest.
It,
For most people.
yeah. And I almost wonder if it was like a trick, maybe they're looking for the people who are like cutthroat and saying this person should not be brought into the
They're
program.
a
But that's like
psychopath. Yeah.
the psychological,
Ding. We have to have a little light. Yeah.
yeah, the reverse psychology. Like, if we're gonna have this person who's throwing people under the bus and wants them
You.
to like not be accepted in the
Congratulations. You
program.
have passed with flying colors and therefore have failed the test.
Yes,
The
yes,
door is over there. Yeah.
yes,
That's interesting. Yeah, it's hard to know how to handle these things, like as if there aren't enough unknowns as it is. Being thrown into that type of situation, I imagine that's just an extra stressor for a lot of people. Like, you don't know what they're looking for, and even if I think some people will probably act more naturally, whereas other people will get it into their heads, okay, they're probably looking for this, so they're going to artificially behave like that,
yeah,
and then that skews all the results that you would get, right?
yes.
you know
Yep. So again, pros and cons.
yeah.
People, might be really great to show how people collaborate with others and how people maybe don't collaborate with others, who might be a natural leader, who might be too overbearing and controlling. So it's interesting. And I think that it's possible that you could experience any of these different types of formats of interviews. And you can't really prepare enough for these. So that's the one thing that I want to remind people is, if you are preparing for interviews, you want to use all of your resources available to you. Look at the website of the organization that you're applying to. Read their About Us page. Look at their social media pages to see what they're interested in currently, what they're working on.
Yeah, and look them up also, not necessarily from their source, but from what other people are saying about them. Because there's always going to be a certain amount of noise. There's going to be people saying stuff about people. But if there's like a real trend
Yeah.
where everybody's pointing out red flags about a certain organization, or they're all saying the same thing about a certain organization, then maybe there's something to it, right? So
Yep.
also look into that.
Yep.
We got a couple of these things here. I mean, if you're aware of the interviewer, unsatisfied with our answers, we should use backup small talks, communication skill. And sometimes you can't win. Like, sometimes you're up against people that just, they've got this false thing in their head. They're convinced of it. They're applying it to you. There's, like, I'm sure everybody can tell horror stories about that. You're talking to someone who does not believe that educational credentials have any value.
Yep.
There's entire industries where people have that belief. There's other industries, they believe the opposite. They believe like educational credentials are the absolute be all end all. And if you
If
have
you don't have a
more,
bachelor's degree, we will not consider you.
yeah, or they think that if you have attained, like, you've got a master's degree or whatever, that means you are hands down better at any job they could ever throw your way than anyone else who doesn't have a master's degree. And it's like, you know, and if you just don't happen to believe what they believe, it's just, you're really at an impasse. And I think in that situation, if you still want the job, you kind of have to go along with their side of things if you want them to look favorably upon you. It's just that simple. It's
Yep.
sad but true.
And
Uh,
that's probably how it is with a lot of things, right? If you're meeting someone new and you want to get on, their good side and you don't want to make a bad impression, you're probably going to be a little bit more unauthentic initially than, once you get to know them and you can reveal some more vulnerabilities and your deeper, darker secrets.
yeah, this is it. Just I don't know. I understand it, but in another sense, it's like, wow, people are going to really great lengths not to work with people. We
Yeah,
don't want to get to know people, so we're going to devise all these kinds of things where we can convince ourselves that we know them and we know what they're really like, when in reality they're probably really not very accurate.
right.
um, Mary says, I've been a part of a group interview where we took turns answering questions. It was a new experience and I enjoyed it. Okay, so you got to hear presumably the answers that everybody was giving. Would that influence your answers? I imagine it would, to a degree, right?
Yeah, it could. And it might also be a great opportunity to have like those more challenging conversations like, hey, you make a great point, and what about this? Or maybe I don't completely agree with what you said. I can appreciate it, and how might we see it in a different way?
Yeah,
um, yeah.
yeah. I mean, this is the thing. At the end of the day, people believe what they believe. We don't all agree on everything, and that's okay.
Yeah.
We don't have to. Um, and it can be a real challenge if you're being interviewed by an individual or an organization that has certain beliefs about people or about skills or about, qualifications or about career paths or whatever it is. And, chances are if this was like some magical world where you could get all those laid out like on the table on day one, you would probably not agree with most of them or a lot of them anyway. And so how we handle that, is going to be a big part of it.
Yeah,
You
and
know,
that's again looping back to the conversation we've had countless times, why job searching is so hard
yep.
and why the interview process is flawed. There's never going to be the perfect interview process where the right person will always be hired. We've got qualifications as one thing, we've got fit and your interpersonal skills and all these like things that are much harder to quantify and measure that are at play. And yeah,
You're absolutely right. And it's all based on theories, and every organization or even the individuals within organizations, they all have different theories on what makes a good employee and how to assess someone,
yeah,
and sometimes these theories have been shown to be completely wrong when you see a company fail. Like they got their wish. They hired all the people that they wanted to hire, and then they went bankrupt. Like they took, maybe they were prosperous before, and then they flushed everything into the toilet and they dissolved the company. I've seen that. And it's shown then for everyone to see. It's like, this is a failing strategy, including your ideas of what makes a good employee and what makes a bad employee. And maybe they're intentionally hiring people that another organization would intentionally steer clear of.
yeah,
Like we've seen that in management circles where, I can't remember, there was a famous doctor, a medical doctor, who wrote some famous book on psychopaths, and he worked in the Canadian prison system, and he devised this test to detect psychopaths, and it was adopted in the United States by all the medical people there and around the world. And so he would go to medical conferences where he would talk about psychopaths and sociopaths, and he was saying that, after a lot of these lectures or keynote speeches, or whatever he was doing, he would get approached by business people that were saying like, well, how can I hire those people? Right. And, so there's like a extreme example of like, people that are actively out there looking for the wrong traits, and all their interview processes, it seems like they're all tailored to identify those. And, because they're desirable, when people could make a strong argument that they're looking for the completely wrong things.
Well,
So,
and that
yeah,
happens with businesses all the time when they choose to keep someone who's a high performer who's just toxic to the culture.
yeah,
And it happens time and time again. It's happened in every organization I've worked in,
yep,
probably every organization every person has worked in. It's hard for the business to justify getting rid of someone who's efficient, effective, driving the numbers, able to do the work really well, even though they are toxic to the culture and the environment that is the workplace.
yeah. And in that case, you've got um, a situation where you're evaluating data that you have, like a high performer. Presumably, you can quantify that in terms of sales volume or money they've saved or made, or some kind of quantification of that, versus toxic environment, which is there's probably not a lot of data driving that. It's more of like just a vibe or a principle, right?
Less
So
quantifiable.
yeah, so you've got, okay, on the one hand we've got quantifiable data, on the other hand we've got a general vibe or principle or belief. It's going to be very hard for the belief to win out under those circumstances. Maybe you can get quantifiable data. You can say, okay, we've done interviews with several coworkers of this person and former coworkers, and we've determined that that person has driven away 8 employees who have all gone on to produce this much of revenue or profit or whatever for our competitors. Now when you hold that data up, it's maybe a bit more clear about what the right thing to do is.
Yep.
But it's that selectiveness of like, we're going to get data for this side, but we're not going to get data for this side because we really want this side to win out, right?
Yes.
And there's all that kind of stuff going on. So
Yep.
it just, at the end of the day, you do your best, and one company may not hire you, the next one will.
Mm-hmm.
Just that simple.
Yep. And you want to find the company and the organization and the role that is the best fit for you. And that doesn't mean that there is only one position, one company that is the best fit for you.
And if you're watching this on my channel, Abby can help you get there faster. It can help you select the right companies, prepare you, and all that. So check out not only your YouTube channel, but some of the other services that she provides for people. A lot of value there. So check that out. I see there's 33 people here. I think we covered all the
We
types
did.
of interviews, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And there
Yeah.
might be some more out there that we didn't touch on, but I think these are the ones that are a little bit more common that you might encounter. There's, I think gamification is probably going to become more of a thing, but I don't even know what that might look like. Like on the spot problem solving with like case studies, and that kind of seems like more of a situation or a simulation or an assessment that you might do in the interview. But there's probably things out there that we haven't touched on, or evolving formats that aren't even in existence yet that are going to become hot topics soon.
Yeah. And let us know if there's a topic you'd like us to cover or address. We're going to be we have a few more of these scheduled, so we're going to be covering some more stuff. Special thanks to Wei, who has been going like crazy in the comments there. Yeah, lots of stuff. Thank you. And thank you to the people who participated and commented wherever you're watching this. Thank you so much, Abby. It's great to do this again. And
Yeah, good to see you, Bill. Happy 2020, 2025, everyone.
2025. Yeah. It's going to take a while to get used to saying that.
It will. It will.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. We are going to be back. I think it's next week, right? We're doing 1 week from today. Yeah. So tune in again where we'll do this again.
Yep.
Thank you so much, and we'll see you soon.
Bye, everyone.
Take care.